Shane Sabine isn't your typical venture capitalist. He lives in Mallorca, but his impact reaches deep into the US startup scene, where he's backing some of the most overlooked and ambitious immigrant tech founders. As the founder of Punch Capital, he's on a mission to open doors for gritty entrepreneurs who aren't left out of traditional VC circles. One of his recent wins, helping the co founder of Venmo launch a new startup and earned the title of the highest ROI to check size investor in the process. In this episode, Shane shares how he's flipped the script on venture capital, why immigrant founders are his focus, and how he has a powerful bridge towards Silicon Valley. My first question that I'm going to go straight into is, you've built a fund focused on immigrant founders. Can you share how your decade in Germany shaped that mission?
Yeah, I can say very powerfully. Maybe unfortunately, but I'd like to see it play out positively and effectively as I vicariously live through the founders I now support. It definitely informed our approach. I can't say it's a thesis so much as it is a coverage area, right? Founders definitely appreciate the fact that Punch Capital embodies the essence of their being, right? They are difficult journeys and so forth. So that's a great point on which to connect with them. And simply to say, maybe due to certain cultural differences, I'll chalk it up to that only. And I'm not complaining. That doesn't get anybody anywhere, but merely an observation. Despite having contributed to the local culture in Germany, I lived in Stuttgart, I lived in Mainz, commuted to working to Frankfurt, worked at the Deutsche Telekom headquarters briefly in Bonn, and so forth. I don't know if you've spent any time in Germany, but it's quite different, maybe better in some regards, but definitely different than the how folks carry on in the States. They're arguably less open, and I could count essentially on one hand how many times I was ushered into anyone's networks. And what has come out of my venture journey over the past half decade plus has been that I am a super connector. That might be table stakes, albeit within venture, but that is definitely my spike, right? And I'm getting more and more recognized for that. And it's essentially out of the chip on my shoulder, wanting to pay that forward and help catalyze success toward immigrant founders in the US who are dealing with similar struggles.
So, what made you move to Germany? What was the plan to move out there?
Yeah, there's a book that I have not read but heard a lot about. John Grisham wrote it, Playing for Pizza, something akin to that. Essentially, so I was on Brown University's football team and had an opportunity post financial crisis. So initially, I was working at Merrill Lynch in New York City, ultra high net worth individual, international division. Yeah, that was very short lived. So last in, first out kind of deal. CEO, quote unquote, resigned shortly thereafter. The bank was acquired, I believe, by Citigroup. In any regard, had to shift focus altogether and was training merely for physical fitness and a bit of fun with some ex-NFL athletes, actually a current one, Lofa Tatupu, who had a $40 million contract with the Seattle Seahawks, was native to Massachusetts, where I grew up. So was at the local fitness studio, as you'd say in Europe, right? The local gym.
Yeah, yeah.
And had an opportunity to connect with coaches from abroad who were seeking skill position players. Like there's ample foot-eye coordination in Europe, of course, but a lack of knowing how to throw or catch a ball or anything. Received an offer of all places from outside Munich to quarterback an American football team, which was, as you'd say in German, an Erfahrungssache, which means a nice experience. So it wasn't the pay so much. Like I guess technically you could consider it semi-pro, and had my circumstances accounted for as far as insurance and shacking me up. I had a decent place and all that, but it was just a new chapter and opened my eyes to a different world out there. So grateful for that. And
So
thereafter,
you played American football in Germany?
oddly enough, I did. Yeah, that is a bit of a strange thought construct for people to wrap their heads around. And it was there was some semblance of a fan base left over from NFL Europe and the accompanying logos and team paraphernalia, all that. So that was like the Frankfurt Galaxy. I think.
Yeah, no, there was a European League at some point, probably over a decade ago, and that was being pushed. But now the advent of NFL coming to a lot overseas places, like we just had last weekend, we had a couple of teams in London, and I know they've been to other places. So it now feels like those sort of European leagues are being pushed lower because NFL has decided it wanted to be a global for location of their game. So that's fascinating. So what made you move to Mallorca? What's because I can see the lovely background and people who are watching on YouTube will be able to see the beautiful background behind you. What made you move to Mallorca then?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was distance dating a lovely Spanish, now ex girlfriend, and post COVID decided to move to be closer to her. Haven't looked back. There's a bit of trouble in paradise, as it were, and we remain close, which is nice. Yeah, so I'm very grateful to be here, running a podcast of my own from this vantage point, and we focus on founders, essentially unicorns. Some have had multiple exits in the 8, 9 figure ballpark, which is cool. So that's a nice backdrop, anyways. I am trying to figure out how to incorporate that in the DNA of my fund. Again, as a super connector, somebody who's a plug and could very well embed a transatlantic element, helping companies connect, build here, start here, and get in at a low price, if I may admit, and then help them scale stateside.
So do you use the word just then you see yourself as a super connector? What does that actually mean for you and your business being a super connector? And how do you make money out of that?
Yeah, I guess I will start off on a sour note, but definitely a learning opportunity, as I've heard from a wise man out there. If it isn't working on you, it's working for you. So all work works. Excuse me, if it's not working for you, it's working on you. There was a possibility to capitalize quite significantly on a late stage tech stock transaction, actually two, in both OpenAI and Anthropic. I was aware on the buy side of a gentleman who had just left a prominent US family office en route to a self made billionaire. I'll just leave the basic details out there. And his CIO, they had a very lean decision making structure. It's just the three of them, basically the billionaire, the guy I knew, and the CEO, CIO rather, in the middle, who had a mandate, a hard commit toward 50 million in each asset, right? So 100 total. And this is not accounting for any other potential buyers toward this company, OpenAI, which everyone knows is behind GPT, and its competitor, Anthropic, which just raised 13 billion. Given on the sell side, I've been in cahoots somewhat with crossover funds, tier one funds out of Silicon Valley that got into those companies quite early and had connecting points within to the CFOs and so forth who were looking to get rid of a little bit of their chips on the table. In any case, I was not able to capitalize on that, unfortunately, due to the lack of. You'd figure this would be the easiest piece to obtain, which is the compliant broker dealer coverage. Right? Maybe that would have been a mere 1, 2, 3%, but I would have been doing pretty well by now on the basis of that. Otherwise, I'm not quite sure actually how I capitalize on it. I think that's what I'm in the process of discovering. Yes, I have a fund, and it does certainly help with the social capital and the credibility. If you have I'm revamping the website, right, to reflect this, but I've got testimonials from founders who have built unicorns as CEOs or who sold their companies for $200 million, another for 200 million, another for 780 million. The guy, in that sense, actually, it was a UK company back in 2019. He sold for nearly 800 million. I think it was all cash to Blackstone or something. He said, Shane, thank you for that introduction. It was golden for both of us. And yeah, we're talking about a multi-million-dollar contract. The 100K POC has already kicked off. I'll keep you posted. So then he sends a deal our way, right? So it's good to be in those circles among very
So are
credible
you
folks.
taking a cut? You're taking a a percentage of the deal, are you, as the
No,
introducer?
no, I'm serving founders, right? So my heart's in the right place, and that's what I'm in the business of, right? I take money from LPs and support founders as my customers primarily, LPs being the shareholders. No, but I guess on the back end of all of this, I would love to, this is my intent for the next fund, to get each and every portfolio company, like one of the founders or co-founders, to, even if it's symbolic, just put in, I wouldn't announce this per se, but maybe it's 1,000, or put in a commitment of ideally 100,000 or more, but to show alignment across the fund and indicate very well that I'm serving my founders.
So can we just clarify with my audience? So a couple of things I just want definitions for, because a lot of the people who listen to my show, they're business owners, they're small business owners, they run their business, they're looking to grow, they're looking to scale it. But just can we get some definitions, cleaned and done? Can you give me a definition of what venture capital is? And can you give me a definition of unicorn? So the audience all on board with everything. If you could do that for me.
Got it. Yeah. Unicorn, just to get that off the list there, very simply is $1 billion company. Okay. A company that has grown, and there's some consensus out there, some indication that its valuation is north of $1 billion.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Unicorns are in the US, but there are an increasing number popping up throughout Europe, especially with the onset of AI and how
Yeah.
that's a transformational, revolutionary shift. Okay, so there's that. What venture capital is an asset class within the private markets. Okay, so you have private equity. You've probably heard of that, like when essentially Excel monkeys, right? They, and I say this respectfully, but they go to maybe a top school, they're go-getters, they then join Goldman Sachs and iBanking, and thereafter join a private equity shop once they've got the requisite skill set. And they'll analyze companies to assess which are best to acquire, manage, and then sell again. Venture
They usually do
capital,
a 5-year term, don't they? It's generally a 5-year.
yeah, more or less. And I'm not actually quite certain on the specifics, but with venture capital, it's a longer holding period of 10 years or so, wherein the capital from LPs, from investors into the fund, that is, limited partners, is illiquid. It's locked up, it's given to the founders and entrusted to them. Yeah. And yeah, so venture capital is a subset within private equity that's devoted primarily, I'd say there'd be two distinguishing factors. One is it tends to be much earlier stage. Okay, so we're talking companies at inception. Picture Steve Jobs or Larry Page from Google in the garage. That said, once a company hits $1 million in annual recurring revenue, or 10 million or 100 million, that's still under the segment of venture capital. And that leads me to my second point. Ideally, as opposed to private equity, within VC, the exit outcome is intended to be massive, right? It's riskier. The returns are probably similar, but it's quite spotty as far as the dispersion of outcomes. And maybe it's an IPO, right? Maybe a company, Google acquired a company recently for billions of dollars. That another thing about VC is it tends to be, this is maybe the third point of differentiation from private equity, is it's very software centric. And ideally, we're talking very high margins.
High
Robotics is a
risk as well, though.
high risk. Yeah, absolutely. It's high risk, high reward. And it's essentially play money. And within the private markets, in both private equity more comprehensively and specifically within venture capital, there are regulations out there to protect investors that dictate one's net worth must have surpassed a certain threshold, um, ensuring that folks don't throw in their entire retirement savings unknowingly. So it's essentially for the investors who, generally speaking, here want to, maybe they've got the second home and they want the yacht on top.
Yeah. Yeah. So what you've described in other parts of the media is that you back founders that are often overlooked. How do you spot those potential businesses, those founders, in the conversations that you're having with them? How do you work out what are the right deals and what are the bad deals?
Yeah, actually, I think that's a common misconception that because they're immigrants, they're overlooked. In fact, the data supports that already unicorns, half immigrants are responsible for founding half the unicorns, at least in the US. I don't know the numbers elsewhere. Yeah, and roughly half the Fortune 500 as well. And they self-select actually because they tend to be non-consensus thinkers. They're blessed with this external perspective, commercially, culturally, and this conviction to thread the needle and make something out of it. And they've got a lot to prove, maybe through their heritage. It's a legacy their families have instilled in them that they must leave and so forth. Yeah, so it's quite common to find an immigrant founder. The question is actually, and I admit somewhat from a marketing perspective, how does Punch Capital, as a fledgling fund, guarantee any semblance of credibility? We're targeting, just zooming out a little bit, the kinds of companies we're looking for are, they're all early stage, but comparing options, one can't find funding at all. We actually might avoid that and gravitate toward the company that doesn't need us whatsoever. And they're quote unquote playing Tetris to try to get us into the round. Okay. Kleiner Perkins is in. It's oversubscribed. They're asking us, hey, what's your X factor? What can you really do for us? As a result, a couple of things. Revamping the website to reflect that we've already invested alongside the likes of General Catalyst, Khosla, Y Combinator, Insight Partners, this top tier fund out of New York City, has marked up our deals. Right. So we want to let them know that the money is coming from a good place and we can back it up with the social capital we possess, and the founder testimonials and so forth. Yeah. So it's back to the marketing bit. I admit an appeal to their sensibilities. If not anything else, at least we're the one fund out there, there are a handful, but that's speaking to that we're tugging on their heartstrings and showing alignment on a more personal side.
Are you tired of chasing clients and feeling like the only way to grow is to work harder and harder? Imagine instead having a steady stream of qualified clients coming to you because they know exactly who you are and why they need your help. That's what Christine Campbell Rapin is all about. Christine is the founder of Clear Acceleration Inc. and the creator of Turn On Your Waterfall movement. She works with entrepreneurs and business owners to cut through the noise, sharpen their messaging, and build simple systems that consistently attract clients without burnout and without gimmicks. If you want to discover how to stop chasing and start attracting, Christine has built resources and training designed exactly for you. Her work is trusted by business owners who are serious about creating consistent growth without the overwhelm. So here's what to do next. Go to the description below and click on the link and sign up. Take that first step today and start building consistent growth in your business with Christine Campbell. So what do you do that's different to other investors? Because the Venmo co-founder said that you are an amazing investor, an amazing person to be able to work with. What do you do differently beyond the immigration side? The immigration side of the founders, what do you do that makes that impact that you've got people like Venmo co-founders praising you?
Sure. In a distinct, maybe metrics oriented sense, we do have a partnership with Microsoft, for example. And of course, its alignment with OpenAI helps because as we send an email blast to our portfolio founder network, some may be receptive to the $100,000. It's a six-figure deal, basically, toward credits and tokens that they can utilize. So there have been a number of companies that have done so and spoken positively about what we've enabled there. So that's nice just off the top. Otherwise, yeah, this is less distinct maybe, but just taking your example, I've introduced the Venmo founder to a number of billionaires and to top funds as he considers raising, to talent out there. And that's typically how it goes down. I think I had another founder, Imran, appeared on Punchcast as well, had a $65 million exit. I introduced him to Daniel, in whom we invested, Daniel's last company, App Direct, hit a unicorn valuation, and we've invested alongside Ashton Kutcher's fund, Sound Ventures. They wrote a $10 million check in the Series A, and we put a relatively de minimis amount in. Anyways, introduced the two of them. Imran reported back, "Hey Shane, I'll be coming out to Spain in October, maybe. Thank you for facilitating that intro. We really gelled, we clicked, and Daniel became my first paying customer." Okay. Yeah, I've sourced founding machine learning engineers. And so I guess the point is, like, being unobtrusive yet active, that's our operating style. We're not throwing in $1 million check. We're not commanding a board seat, trying to push our weight around, but we know where we can help out. And that's exactly when asked and not
Right.
otherwise. When we do, we tend to punch above our weight, so to speak.
Yeah. And one of the things when I was doing research on you is that a lot of your investments then go on and get further investment in their business as well. That's one of the sort of things that I was looking at the feedback. Just on that idea, how much is that selection of being in your investment? How much of it is a science versus an art form? Because as you said, the PE guys, the private equity guys are doing the spreadsheets, and how much of your assessment is based on art form versus science?
It's very much art. It's very much art. Yeah. Okay. And there are some limiting factors in that regard. By virtue of it, right, inherently being very early on, it's difficult to suss out any, like, there are no metrics. So how can we project or pontificate? It's anyone's best guess. In saying that, anyone's best guess, it might be the best guess of Khosla or Insight to lean on. And so what we do, this helps us directionally get a sense of which companies might have a good chance of establishing momentum on the fundraising front. And otherwise, but that if a company can fundraise well, that might somewhat indicate that they can also hire, because it does come down somewhat to founder sales. It's also an indication that they can sell well as they appeal to customers. So what we do is send our deals. We've just begun doing this and have seen some promising results to the likes of those funds mentioned, and have been pleasantly surprised with the results. A number of top funds have been receptive to our facilitating introductions. And we're
Right.
talking about founders maybe who've got MIT PhDs, they're whatever, Columbia dropouts, they used to work at NASA or SpaceX or what have you. Maybe they're in robotics, which tends to be all the rage these days. It was AI agents, it might still be in any regard. So when we see that one company out of the top 5 is very decidedly the target of all these investors, we keep a closer eye out on them. Now, guess what? That comes back to us as well. The founder asks, Punch, are you interested in deploying a check 100K into us too? We might very well. At least we're well positioned, having been pro social and actually done something for them ahead of even being on their cap table.
So, something that I'm just trying to understand, and I think my audience are in a similar position. So, you have a fund and you have people that put money into your fund, and you might personally invest into that fund as well, but you've got money coming into that fund, and I'm making up the number. It almost certainly is more, but you've got $100,000, pounds, euros, and you're meeting investors and you're having conversations, and you might say to one immigrant founder, here's 20,000. I know the numbers are bigger, but just to give, there's 20,000. And then another one, and they're doing something really interesting, and you go, I want to give you 50,000. And then you've got 50,000 less, and you're like, okay, no one else is interested to invest. When that money, if you spend that other £50,000 on another investment and you've got nothing in the bank, you've got no extra funds. Is it constantly a conversation for you is find the right founders, having conversations, understanding their business, building relationships with them. That's one aspect. Then the other side of the aspect is building funds. You're talking to billionaires, multi-millionaires to be interested in investing in your fund. So it's forever, it is a business model of you've got to bring money in, but you've obviously got to deploy that money in successful companies that are going to grow. And you might get some hits and you might get some losses, but you are constantly doing these number of conversations, bringing funds in, deploying funds, bringing funds in, deploying funds. Is that a fair assessment of your daily activities, your weekly activities?
Yes, you've encapsulated it perfectly.
It must be quite an exhausting. Would you say you're an extrovert? Would you say you're a people person? Because there's a lot of what you're doing is connecting with people, whether they are investors or whether they are founders.
Yeah, I think I am. People give me the feedback, so I'll lean into it that I'm shy and maybe I'm a bit reserved. Maybe I am at a point in my life during which I'm like assessing and maybe overly. Yeah, I don't. Okay, that's maybe an introvert answer. So perhaps I am an introvert. It's just really difficult for me to accept that notion. I say this, I know it sounds silly, but going all the way back to high school, right? I was most charismatic and like whatever else, like just doesn't quite. People change. I will say that I do have, and I just have this knack for connecting. I was out at the here in Mallorca. Excuse me, the dog barking incessantly in the background.
So,
I don't think the audience can hear. But here in Mallorca, there was the super yacht season closing party because they're all heading down to the Caribbean now. And I was with this young lady who's an entrepreneur, and she had her business cards. I actually didn't know her well, but she seemed nice enough. And for whatever reason, she wanted me to hand out cards to pretty ladies, and I did it. And it was, you would think it'd be extremely awkward. Maybe it was just more of a gag than anything, but it did lead to conducive conversations. And she thanked me profusely afterwards. So I got on a good side. And maybe because it's quite low pressure. I think that's the thing when I was talking to my family. And again, going back to conjuring up ways how to capitalize on this to grow the fund. And the average check size, to be clear, is 100K, though it can vary. How do we grow? How do we grow this fund by an order of magnitude? Or are there other ways to capitalize on this connectivity? And I said that I've won over a bunch of billionaires and so forth. And the feedback was no. The correction was you've earned their trust. But at some point, I have to really lean in and apply the pressure. And I might, right? I think the best business people have a knack for connecting both the relational with the transactional. So I
yeah.
have to incorporate that element as well.
And it sounds like you're going to yacht parties, you're going to boat shows, you're going to casinos, you're going to like you maybe like training to be a pilot, all these sort of high value, high expense things. Is that where you're making those connections with the millionaires, billionaires, etc.?
Yeah. So an investor in my next fund just so happens to be a yacht broker who single-handedly essentially sold a prominent billionaire entrepreneur's like 60 million euro yacht last year. And it's nice to have had his support. We've collaborated on a number of opportunities. Just I'm connecting him to people at country clubs and whatever else, and that's relevant for his business. And so he saw that I paid it forward, and he was happy to likewise contribute to my efforts. Let's say so. Zooming out again, went to the Monaco Yacht Show per his invitation, and certainly met some interesting people. Most notably, one of whom was a fellow Brown alum and owner of Maximus, which is a maybe that we should like remove that. No, it can be. Anyways, it's worth 80 million euros. And I actually, to be clear, did not get the chance to connect with him. I could have, should have, would have. I think we were all quite tired, and he needed to rest. It was at the end of the 4 day extravaganza over there. But his VIP friend gave me at least a tour of the boat, and we connected. He's a really interesting character and has visited the the owner's home on several occasions, I believe, and did promise to facilitate that introduction. No, certainly, I'm meeting interesting people. That's you have to be in the right places, I think, and do business in person. And I've happily outsourced a lot of my work, as one should, as one learns to delegate and to more
Yeah.
effectively grow the business.
Okay, let's go back to day one of Punch Capital. What was the first milestone for you? What was the first stepping stone for Punch Capital to get to that level where maybe it was getting the funds, maybe it was the first check that was being paid? Take me back to day one and what that was like for you.
Sure. Day one was essentially a family office investor approaching me and wanting to invest multiple millions of dollars. So I thought, okay, this is prior to that, technically speaking, I had gone through some fundraising program. I didn't find it to be a great fit. So I disengaged. It was quite rigorous, but also for people who had no venture capital experience whatsoever. So I was, in some sense, going far too deep. Anyway, so I, ironically enough, upon disengaging, came across this gentleman who very resourcefully committed the first several million to the fund. So I learned by doing, by getting lawyers in place and a fund admin and setting up the operations and the structure of the fund itself, which was a harrowing exercise. I definitely would recommend to folks considering this to do exactly that and get a great lawyer off the bat. Um, yeah, so
So it was
sorry,
the
great.
investor that came first before you found the companies.
Yeah, oddly enough, yeah. But I guess it was about time, having been in the ecosystem for several years by that point and doing just about everything else. At some juncture, that the capital has to come into play, and so I've had that to play with, so to speak.
Yeah. So you've co-invested with giants like Closer and Kleiner Perkins. How do you build trust and access to those types of deals and at that level?
Sure. I will give a kind of a funny anecdote as far as Kosla. That's actually credit to this fellow I mentioned who was in Europe on. So I don't know if many Americans will head to Europe for weddings and spend a whole week in Turkey or Croatia or wherever it might be. He's friends with a high-powered lawyer, a partner at a top firm who often closes on these early stage transactions and is privy to the right information at the right time. And there was a founder who was the subject of all of this. It was the founder's wedding. And by virtue of having been friends, established that rapport, they left a spot for us to deploy a little bit into their pre-seed deal with Khosla leading. So that was cool. So there's that. Otherwise, how to establish trust. I would say it's an incremental game. And apologies, this dog is really going nuts in the background here.
All
Can you
right,
hear it?
don't worry.
Out of
Yeah, just
curiosity?
keep going. Just keep going.
You
It's
can't
fine.
hear it? Okay, because
It's
generally
fine.
like that, you can't. Okay. Yeah. So I, it's a great question. How to establish trust? Maybe actually be trustworthy. That probably helps. Be sincere, be authentic. People can sense that. Perhaps I've leaned too deeply into that element. Again, like being more relational than transactional, but it has won me access into rounds with those co-investors. I think another way of establishing trust is brand building. And I've recognized the power of that. There's a podcaster, this guy, Myron Golden, and he's big into brand building and claims that it's like building one's own brand is about the best investment one could make. Um, and as such, I'm again revamping the website to reflect that I've hosted Unicorn Founders. That's an immediate, I don't have to go through and explain everything. I just direct people to the website
Yeah.
and say, these are the folks, not quite by proxy, but if they're bothering to spend an hour of their time with me, maybe something, if we were to pop the hood and look underneath, like maybe it would all be clean and attractive. So that's building those indicators is critical too.
So we've talked about the wins and some of the successes that you've had. But what's the sort of percentage? You don't have to necessarily answer for your business, but what's the VC percentage win-loss ratio for the market? Or if you want to be specific about your market, that's fine. But just generally, what's the sort of win to loss ratio that you have?
Yep. I have yet to discover, given this is the first fund, I certainly hope it's toward 20, 30, 40% win. But what exactly is a win? Is a win a single, or is it a grand slam? Is it a, right? Is it
Yeah.
a base hit or home run? And ideally, you are indexing toward more home runs, guarantees, but moonshots that if they pay off, they'll pay off 1,000x, 10,000x, 500x. We had an acquisition recently, which is nice. It was in the 8-figure territory. This company, out of the founder, it's a Delaware C Corp, and they went through Y Combinator. We invested alongside General Catalyst in this instance. Founders from London, Oxford, McKinsey, what have you, in the DZ Labs is the name, in the AI enterprise metadata space. So that's nice, but does it really move the needle? A unicorn certainly would, right? To your point, it's high risk, high reward, and there's a power law. So if you have one Elon Musk, you can't quite describe how that makes up for thousands of other founders. So
Yeah.
it's really about applying all of your effort to get into to be in the good graces of such outlier founders.
Yeah. What would you say your risk appetite is?
I would say it should be higher. And if you've got any like any suggestions there, I'm happy to embrace.
No, I'm interested about what you think you're self reflecting. What do you think your risk appetite actually is? Are you actually, because the nature of your business is you have to be quite you have to accept risk because your whole business is based upon taking risks for those unicorns, for those $1 billion businesses. But I'm interested for you when you're self reflecting, like about maybe outside of the fund, maybe other things that you might do might be interesting. What would you say your risk appetite is?
Yeah, I would say maybe that's funny that so I'm a church going, relatively conservative, introverted fellow who reflects a lot and thinks before they speak, maybe to a fault. So does that give any indication? Certainly. Ironically enough, I wonder where it comes from, though. Not everything. If you dig beneath the surface and discover the fact that, again, I've bothered to live in multiple countries and I'm investing into folks who resemble myself in some regard. At least I'm mission driven, you can say.
Mm.
And it's about to be clear, the ROI and not the DEI or anything. Okay. So I'm certainly goal oriented. I'm ambitious. I'm intentional. Now, I'm also aware of the realities of building a business. And as a first time fund, this is the dilemma. It's calculated risk. And why would anyone necessarily trust me in my investment judgment? I'd like to believe that to some extent they are and they do. However, if they have interest in venture capital, great. They can't get into these oversubscribed funds with pensions and endowments already committed, right? So if they can't get into Andreessen Horowitz, if I can tell them, in fact, we do have an example of this, and funny enough, it's actually this um, former VC, Harvard, like it ticks off all the right boxes, but he's building in like church tech, religion tech, because it's an untapped space. There's hardly any competition in it. A16Z has put in a 500K check. Funny enough. Anyways, if you're indicating that, hey, we can give you access essentially to what you want, then maybe it's wise to optimize for that. And eventually, over time, as we build more effectively, crystallize our brand and identify what our differentiation is, then I can lean into my own conviction and win over the trust of investors as far as my judgment.
Look, we're coming to the end of the interview. I asked the same 6 questions to all of my guests. They're quick fire questions. They don't need a quick fire answer. First question is, what's the best decision that you've made?
Oof, best decision. Okay, all right. Having revealed I go to church, I'd say the requisite, this is like maybe more American style, but that I've given my life to Jesus. I don't know if that goes over well with your audience, but I'll stand on that.
Okay, great. What's the best piece of advice you've been given?
To not proselytize. No, joking. So that's up there. To surrender lately, right? This is something to surrender, to relinquish, to recognize the fact that it's not all up to you, and you can do your part, but you also just have to leave the rest up to fate.
Interesting. Okay. Who's the person that's helped you most in your career?
Yeah. Okay. Awkwardly enough, my ex-girlfriend. I didn't want to go on a tangent about this, but now that I've got 20 seconds, I credit her to my growth as far as self-belief, focus, and general industriousness.
How long were you with her for?
I was with her for, they have an expression, as I've heard, it might not be appropriate for audiences, but basically get off the pot. If you're sitting on it too long, make up your
Right.
mind. So it was
Yeah.
a number of years, several years, we'll say.
And did she inspire the fund?
I can't say that directly, but she definitely was a sounding board extraordinaire. She bore the brunt of it. She had to hear, yeah, no,
Yeah.
that was psychologically tormenting for her, I'm sure.
Yeah. All right. Moving on. Tell me about a regret that you have.
As I look back, probably not operating quickly enough, just making quick decisions and rolling with it.
But it's hard to make quick decisions. And I can tell by speaking to you for this time on the show that you're a considered, you're thoughtful, you're intentional on how you communicate. So therefore, that would, for me, would reflect on those decisions that you make have to be thought through, considered, careful, and intentional. Making quick decisions is quite, being instinctive and being intuitive with your decision making is actually quite hard, and that usually comes with a lot of experience, like 20, 30, 40 years.
It could very well. And I'm grateful for having made, not necessarily for having made mistakes per se, but having been able to reflect on them and course correct. That has increased my confidence as it regards the next fund, assuredly. Secondly, though, and more critically, like I emphasize this, intuition and just being able to act on gut feeling. I think they say increasing research is out there that the gut functions as a second brain of sorts. And
Mm,
one should allow oneself to recuperate. And I notice here's the point, when I get good sleep, I'm able to act out of my whole being and not overemphasize the cognitive element. That's something distinct I'm working on. That's like the boss. I've done a lot of habit building this year. I've been fasting, which is immensely, I will say, I recommend that highly. It's actually easier than expected. I do, and others quietly, without calling it fasting, fast, but it's 16:8 or 18:6, and I
yeah.
shed a lot of weight and feel more energetic and so forth. But definitely intentional on improving my sleep so that I don't have to be weighed down by decisions. I can just make them. It's on
Right.
feel.
Next question. Was there a time when you wanted to give up, and what pulled you through to continue?
Yeah, I think that's part of the human experience. I would imagine we all feel that to some extent, thankfully. I don't struggle with that altogether too often. I don't know what has pulled me through, especially difficult, dark times. But as you say that, I reflect that we should all be a bit more empathetic, and if we do sense others are struggling, to accordingly reach out and to lend a hand, especially as guys. I think we tend not to discuss health problems, or especially in tech there's this notion of 996, um, and to downplay the importance of sleep and just hustle culture. It's all quite unhealthy and leads to burnout. Definitely tapping into nature and just
Yeah.
recalling that, hey, what's the purpose of any of this if I can't enjoy it? That tends to help a lot. So I have a CEO coach, actually. She's my next door neighbor. And that female
Okay,
energy, I'm single. So having that, it helps rebalance.
great. Tell me something about you that most people don't know about.
Okay. I'm just looking at myself. Maybe that I have a receding hairline. Technically, I actually do have a full head of hair, but if you were to look back, I think it's because the man bun, it pulls back and these fibers, these threads just eventually disappear at the front of my
Right.
forehead. So there's that.
Yeah, I struggle with that as well. I think that's most men struggle with receding hairline. And lastly, what does legacy mean to you?
Legacy, that's a good one. Acted initially through Chris Zimmerman,
Yeah,
who is a speaker. He's got a family office background of his own and a speaker, like he's at the Dallas Country Club and down in Florence, Italy, where the city
yeah.
essentially gifted him with the keys. And he's all about legacy. So I guess ask him as our common connecting point, but for a more polished answer. But
But what does it
legacy,
mean to you? What is it something you
well,
think about? Is it a consideration for you at this age, at this stage of your life? Or is it something that might happen if you have kids or if you go down that route or not? But what at the moment, is it something that's something that's important to you or is it not?
it is, but it's so long term oriented that it's hard to grasp a hold of that on a daily basis and have that be a compass, like a guiding force. I'm a little clueless in terms of how to have that play out, like with intentionality.
Mm.
Though I will say it's extremely critical. That's the oddity there is how to accomplish more intent and action toward leaving a legacy.
It's a work in progress, legacy.
Amen.
Thank you, Shane. Thank you so much for being a guest on my show. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you. And lastly, if you're enjoying this episode, please do consider hitting the subscribe button and leave a quick review or a comment below. And it helps more people to discover the conversations and grow the audience. And if you know anyone who needs to hear about Shane's story, then please do send them this episode. Thank you for tuning in to Business Growth Talks, and I'll see you on the next one.